I was pressing my navy blue dress, the one with the tiny flowers my son always said made me look distinguished, when my phone buzzed. A short, urgent text from my lawyer lit up the screen. Call me immediately. Robert Mitchell is not the kind of man who exaggerates. For 15 years since the day my husband passed, he'd never once sent a message like that after business hours. I glanced at the clock, 5:12 p.m. In less than an hour, I was supposed to be at my son's house for dinner. A simple family meal or so, I thought. Before we dive into family betrayal stories, drop a comment and tell us where you're watching from. Hearing from people around the world makes these stories even more powerful and reminds us how connected we all are. I called him right away. His voice was steady, but there was tension underneath, the kind that makes you brace yourself. Margaret, I need you to sit down. I'm sitting, I said, though in truth my hands were still gripping the iron like it was a lifeline. This is about Cassandra, your daughter-in-law. The cheerful yellow walls of my tiny apartment, the place I'd rented after selling my old family home, suddenly felt harsh, almost mocking. I had painted them bright to keep my spirits up. Now they pressed down on me like prison bars. What about Cassandra? I asked, my throat dry. You need to prepare yourself. The background we uncovered, it doesn't match the woman you think she is. My heart stuttered. Cassie's face flashed in my mind, her warm smile, the way she called me Mom Thompson, her soft voice when she talked about the children she supposedly cared for as a pediatric nurse. I had believed every word. At 68, people say you get more cautious. But me, maybe I'd become too trusting. Are you telling me she lied? Not just lied, Robert said, his voice low. The identity she's using doesn't exist, not the way she presented it. Margaret, you need to go to James's house tonight. Don't call ahead. Don't warn anyone. Just go. The call ended. The apartment fell silent, so quiet I could hear the cheap wall clock ticking above the fridge. My dress slipped from the ironing board and crumpled to the floor. I bent down to pick it up, but my hands trembled so badly I had to sit. That house I'd sold 37 years of memories of raising James, of nursing my husband through his final illness, gone in the name of fresh starts. Cassie had convinced me with wide hazel eyes and gentle concern that the neighborhood was unsafe, that downsizing was smart, that helping them build their new life together was the right thing to do. Family first, she'd said, and I'd believed her. I grabbed my car keys. The hallway outside smelled faintly of disinfectant, the kind you only notice when your nerves are raw. Outside, Albuquerque glowed under a blood-red sunset, the kind that makes everything look too beautiful for the truth it hides. I drove with both hands locked tight on the wheel, sweat dampening my palms. Every streetlight I passed seemed to pull up a memory, James studying late into the night. James holding my hand at his father's funeral, James introducing me to Cassandra in my kitchen over apple pie. Each memory twisted tighter around my chest. Could it all have been an act? The coffee dates, the warm hugs, the little check-in texts. Have you eaten lunch? Mom, was it all just performance? The thought made me sick and furious. At a red light, I looked into the rearview mirror. The reflection staring back was an old woman with silver hairlines etched deep around her eyes. But beneath the weariness, I saw something else steal. The same steel that had carried me through widowhood, through years of paying bills alone, through nights of doubt and loneliness. It was still there. I turned into the subdivision where the lawns were manicured and the houses lined up in perfect rows. James's house stood glowing in the evening light, its gray roof gleaming, the landscaping crisp and expensive. Through the kitchen window I saw them, Cassie moving briskly, James placing a hand on her back, smiling the smile of a man who thinks his life is complete. I shut off the car and sat in the dark watching. To anyone else, it was the perfect picture of a young couple building their life. To me, it suddenly looked like a painting I once loved, but had just discovered was a forgery. Pretty, but false. Finally, I climbed out of the car. The air carried the smell of damp earth. I tightened my scarf and rang the doorbell. James opened the door with his usual wide grin, wrapping me in a hug that felt real solid. For a second, I wanted to believe everything was fine. Mom, perfect timing, he said. Cassie's making her famous lasagna. Famous in our family, I teased my voice steadier than I felt. I caught sight of the shadows under his eyes. "You sure you're okay?" "Work stress," he said quickly, brushing it off. Then Cassie appeared radiant in a floral apron smelling faintly of sweet perfume. She kissed my cheek. "Mom Thompson." "I opened that Pinot Grigio you brought last time. I thought it'd be perfect for tonight." I followed her into the living room. My eyes swept the space. Everything, every lamp, every vase, every piece of art was Cassie's taste. James's old football memorabilia. Gone. The antique clock his father left him. Nowhere. Even the landscape painting he used to love had vanished. This was her house. Not his. Not theirs. Hers. I forced a smile and sat down, my hands gripping the wooden chair until my knuckles ached. Robert's warning echoed in my ears. Don't call ahead. Don't warn them. I didn't know how I would say it or when, but I knew one thing for certain: I would not stay silent. Cassie set a wine glass in front of me, her brown eyes soft and inviting. Tonight's special, Mom. I wanted everything to feel warm. Warm is important, I replied, holding her gaze. Inside, I whispered a word she didn't hear. And real. The oven timer dinged. Cassie disappeared into the kitchen for the lasagna. James leaned toward me, lowering his voice. "Mom, you okay?" I looked at him, the boy I had raised now, a man who still carried the same vulnerability in his eyes he had as a child. After dinner, I whispered, "I need to ask you a few things, just the two of us." He frowned, not with irritation, but with a flicker of recognition, like he already knew something was wrong, but hadn't been able to name it. And as I sat there, the hum of the oven filling the silence, I realized tonight everything was about to change. Not because I wanted it to, but because the truth was no longer willing to stay quiet. The scent of lasagna drifted from the kitchen, rich with garlic and cheese, but I could hardly taste the air. My mind wasn't here. It was back in the past, sifting through memories of how we'd arrived at this moment. Because betrayal doesn't begin the day you discover it. It begins much earlier, hidden in the softest smiles and the sweetest words. I leaned back in the chair, hands folded in my lap, and let my mind wander. 6 months ago, I thought I was the luckiest mother-in-law in America. James had finally found love after years of burying himself in consulting work. He was 42 and had nearly convinced me he'd chosen career over companionship. Then along came Cassandra, or Cassie, as she insisted I call her. I'll never forget the first dinner we had together. She arrived at my old house with a bouquet of tulips, saying she'd heard from James that I loved them. Tulips were my husband's favorite, not mine, but I didn't correct her. How could I when her thoughtfulness warmed the room? She looked me in the eye that evening, her hazel gaze so earnest it almost hurt, and said, "I want you to know I'm not just marrying James. I'm marrying into this family. That means you too, Mom Thompson." The words hit me like sunlight on a cold day. For years I'd lived alone in that creaky house with peeling wallpaper and drafty windows, eating dinners in silence, filling the quiet with the television. And suddenly, here was this vibrant, attentive young woman who wanted to draw me into her orbit. She made me feel relevant again, seen, needed. I can see now how dangerous that hunger for belonging can be. It makes you blind. The memories kept coming as I sat there at the dinner table. Cassie used to stop by my house for coffee, always so casual, yet always steering the conversation. She'd glance around my old living room, commenting on the upkeep. "Mom Thompson, this house must be hard for you to manage alone. Have you ever thought about downsizing?" I'd laugh it off at first. "I've lived here 37 years, sweetheart. This place is in my bones." But she had a way of circling back, weaving her suggestion into talk of safety and dependence, even how much closer we could live to James. And when she finally brought up the wedding, how expensive it would be, how much easier it would be if I sold the house, I didn't hesitate. I told myself it was a blessing to be able to give. That's what mothers do. They give and give and give some more. The night of the wedding, I watched James's face light up as he spun Cassie across the dance floor. My contribution, $35,000 from the sale of my home, felt worth it in that moment. Worth the aching goodbye, I whispered to my garden. Worth the creak of the stairs, I would never climb again. I thought I had bought their happiness. Now, sitting in their spotless living room, I saw the truth. I hadn't bought happiness. I'd financed an illusion. I studied the decor around me again, the framed photographs of Cassie and James smiling at vacation spots I'd never heard them mention. All glossy, all recent, none of them with friends or family. Always just the two of them. Always Cassie at the center, James orbiting like a planet around her sun. I wondered how many of these smiles were real. James reappeared with 2 wine glasses, handing me one. His hand shook slightly, though he tried to mask it. I recognized the gesture. It was the same way his father used to hold his coffee cup after a 12-hour shift, pretending not to be exhausted. "You're quiet tonight, Mom," James said, sinking into the chair across from me. "Just thinking," I replied, swirling the pale wine in my glass. "Do you remember the tulip garden your father planted out back? The one you used to play hide-and-seek in?" His mouth curved into a tired smile. "I remember you yelling at me not to trample them." We both chuckled softly, but behind his smile, I saw something else. A flicker of weariness. The same exhaustion I'd noticed when I walked in. Cassie's voice floated in from the kitchen, cheerful, practiced. "Dinner's ready in 10. James's smile faltered. He rubbed his temple, the gesture so small I might have missed it if I hadn't been looking. "You all right, honey?" I asked, lowering my voice. He hesitated. "Just work stress." But it wasn't just work, I could feel it. Mothers know. I thought back to when James was a boy, bullied on the playground for being smaller than the other kids. He'd come home with his shirt torn, his eyes red. I'd press him gently, and after enough silence, he'd break down, telling me everything. Back then, the truth was always written on his face if I cared enough to look, and I was looking now. What I saw scared me, because under the surface of his tired smile, there was something else: relief. Relief that someone might finally ask the questions he was too afraid to say out loud. The oven timer dinged again. Cassie swept back into the room with a steaming pan, her movements graceful, her smile glowing. To anyone else, she looked like the perfect wife. To me, she looked like a woman in costume. She set the lasagna down on the table with a flourish. "I made it just the way James likes, extra ricotta." "Smells wonderful," I said, forcing warmth into my tone. James poured more wine. His hand still trembled. I realized then that the story of how we'd gotten here wasn't just about Cassie's lies. It was about my silence, too. About how I'd ignored the warning signs because I wanted so badly for James to be happy, for me to be included, for us to finally feel like a family again. But tonight, silence would no longer be my choice. As Cassie cut the lasagna with surgical precision, her eyes flicked to me. Just for a second too quick for James to notice. But I saw it. A glimmer sharp and calculating behind the sweetness. And in that moment, I knew Robert had been right. The woman my son married was not who she claimed to be. And the only question left was how much damage had already been done. If you're still watching, comment 1, so I know you're still with me. The lasagna sat steaming on the table, its rich aroma filling the room, but I barely tasted it. My fork hovered over my plate while my eyes stayed fixed on Cassie. She laughed at something James said, tossing her blonde hair back, her expression radiant. To anyone else, she was the picture of warmth and charm. But after Robert's call, every movement felt rehearsed, every smile rehearsed. And then I started to notice the cracks. As Cassie poured wine into James's glass, she slipped. Just for a second. Her hand trembled almost imperceptibly before she steadied it. James didn't see he was too busy looking at the lasagna like it was his last meal after a long day. But I saw. And the tremor wasn't nerves from cooking, it was nerves from watching. Watching us. I lifted my fork more for show than appetite. "This is delicious, Cassie," I said, forcing warmth into my voice. "Only the best for you, Mom Thompson," she replied smoothly. "You deserve it after everything you've done for us." Her words should have made me smile. Instead, they landed with a thud. "After everything you've done for us." I thought about the $35,000 gone from my retirement, about the home I'd given up. Gratitude, or a reminder that she knew exactly what she'd cost me. James chewed quietly, eyes on his plate. He looked tired, bone deep, tired like the world had been pressing on his shoulders for months. He forced a smile when he caught me watching. "Work's been crazy, Mom, that's all. But I knew it wasn't just work. Mothers always know." I set my fork down and asked lightly, "James, do you still have Dad's old clock? The one he left you?" James blinked, then looked around the room as if only now realizing it wasn't there. No." Cassie thought it didn't match the decor. "It's in storage." Cassie's eyes flickered toward him, then toward me. For a split second I saw something flash across her face, annoyance sharp and quick like a knife catching the light. But then she smiled again. It was too bulky for the mantel. "Don't you think this modern look is cleaner?" Her voice was sweet, but her eyes told another story. A story of someone who had already decided whose history mattered in this house and whose didn't. I sipped my wine, letting the silence stretch. James shifted in his chair. He knew I'd noticed something. Cassie leaned in her tone, almost playful. "So, Mom, how's the new apartment treating you? I hope you don't regret selling the old place." The question was casual on the surface, but her gaze stayed locked on mine, steady and deliberate. Too deliberate. I forced a smile. "It's cozy, and close to you two, which is what matters." But inside my pulse quickened. She was testing me, probing, wanting to know if I suspected anything. I decided to push back gently, though sometimes I wonder what happened to all the money from the house. I know the wedding cost a lot, but it feels like the numbers never quite added up. James looked up sharply mid-bite. "What do you mean?" I tilted my head, feigning innocence. "Well, you said the wedding was $47,000. I gave $35, but I also remember writing a check for $50 in total. What happened to the other $15? The air went still. James froze his fork halfway to his mouth. Cassie's hand hesitated over her glass. "There were extra expenses," she said finally, her smile tighter now. "The honeymoon, some house upgrades," and she paused, choosing her words carefully. "My student loans." My eyebrows rose. "Student loans? I thought you told me you worked your way through nursing school." Cassie's smile faltered just a flicker, but enough. "I did, mostly, but I had to borrow for the last year. My savings ran out." James frowned, setting down his fork. "Cassie, you never mentioned loans. When we applied for the mortgage, you said you had no debt." For a heartbeat, Cassie froze. Her mask slipped panic, flashing in her eyes before she smoothed it over with practiced grace. "I was embarrassed," she said softly, reaching for James's hand. "You were doing so well, and I didn't want you to think less of me." James didn't take her hand. His eyes narrowed, confusion and doubt fighting across his face. I watched carefully, every nerve alert. It was like seeing a crack spread across glass. You know it's only a matter of time before it shatters. Cassie rose abruptly. "I should check on dessert," she said, her voice too bright. She disappeared into the kitchen, her footsteps brisk, her posture stiff. As soon as she was gone, James turned to me, his voice a whisper. "Mom, what's going on?" I looked at him, at the lines of exhaustion around his eyes, at the man who was still my little boy beneath all the years. I lowered my voice. "James, how much do you really know about Cassie's past?" He blinked. "What do you mean?" "She grew up in Denver, lost her parents in that car accident, worked her way through nursing school, moved here 3 years ago for a fresh start." I leaned closer. "Have you ever seen pictures of her childhood? Of her family, graduation photos?" He opened his mouth, then closed it. His face paled. She said, "It was too painful. That the accident made it hard to talk about." My heart broke watching him, but I pressed on. "And have you ever visited her at work? Met her colleagues?" James hesitated. "No. She said the hospital had strict visitor rules." His voice faltered. "Mom, you're scaring me." I reached into my purse and pulled out my phone. I slid it across the table, showing him Robert's text thread. My lawyer's investigator checked her background for some insurance paperwork. "James, there's no record of a Cassandra Williams ever working at Children's Hospital. No degree, no license." The blood drained from his face. He gripped the table as though steadying himself against an earthquake. From the kitchen, the sound of running water stopped abruptly. Then silence. James's eyes darted toward the doorway. "She's listening." I followed his gaze. Cassie wasn't moving in the kitchen. She was standing perfectly still, too still, her back to us, but I could feel her ears straining for every word. My son's voice cracked as he whispered, "Mom, what do we do?" I swallowed hard, forcing calm into my tone. "We eat dinner, we act normal, and when the time comes, we face this together." But even as I said it, I knew Cassie already suspected the truth. Her performance was unraveling, and the night had only just begun. The silence in that kitchen was louder than any slammed door. James and I sat frozen at the dining table, forks, abandoned eyes fixed on the doorway where Cassie had disappeared. The faint sound of water running had stopped, and now there was nothing. No clatter of plates, no footsteps, no hum of casual movement. Just the tense stillness of a predator listening in. I leaned forward, lowering my voice until it was barely a whisper. "James, don't say another word about this right now." He swallowed hard. "Mom, later." I cut him off gently. "When we're alone." His jaw tightened, but he nodded. I could see the conflict raging inside him, the love for his wife colliding with the gnawing suspicion that had been growing in him for months. He wanted to believe the woman he'd married, but now doubt had a foothold. A moment later, Cassie reappeared, her face glowing with the same cheerful warmth as before. But I noticed the small detail: her hands were dry. She hadn't been washing dishes or checking on dessert. She had been listening. "Everything okay in here?" she asked, voice sweet but her eyes sharp as glass. "Of course," I said smoothly, forcing a smile. "James was just telling me about his work presentation next week." She studied me for a beat too long, as if weighing whether to believe me. Then her lips curved into a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Oh, that. He's been so stressed lately. I keep telling him to relax." She set down a tray of rolls, her movements a touch too precise. James coughed, reaching for one. "I'll be fine, Cassie. You don't have to worry." But she did worry, not for him, but for the cracks widening in her carefully constructed facade. We finished dinner in uneasy silence, the clink of silverware against porcelain far too loud in the quiet room. Every word felt like a test, every glance a trap. At one point, Cassie looked at me across the table, tilting her head just slightly. "So, Mom, do you ever miss the old house? Sometimes I think you must regret letting it go." Her tone was soft, almost sympathetic, but I caught the undercurrent. She wasn't asking about nostalgia. She was gauging how much I regretted the money. I set my fork down deliberately. "I miss the garden," I said truthfully, "but I don't regret helping family." Cassie's eyes softened, but the softness rang false. "You're so generous. Not every mother-in-law would do that." I held her gaze steady, unblinking. Not every daughter-in-law would ask. For the first time, her smile faltered. "Just for a second." James shifted uncomfortably, caught in the middle. He rubbed his temple again, his shoulders slumping as if the weight of the room itself pressed down on him. I hated that he was being torn apart by this charade. Dessert never came. Instead, Cassie busied herself clearing plates, moving quickly, almost too quickly, as though anxious to break the tension. James started to rise to help, but I touched his arm. "Stay," I whispered. When she was out of earshot, he leaned closer, voice low. "Mom, please, just tell me straight. What did your investigator find?" I hesitated. Part of me wanted to spare him the blow to protect him from the full force of what I knew. But I also remembered Robert's voice on the phone. She isn't who she claims to be, and James deserved the truth, even if it broke him. "Not here," I said firmly. "Not with her listening. After dinner in your office." He nodded, relief flickering in his eyes. Cassie returned, wiping her hands on her apron, her gaze flicking between us. "What are you two whispering about?" she asked lightly. I smiled, the kind of smile that feels like glass in your mouth. "I was just asking James about that new computer setup you bought him. He promised to show me." Her eyes narrowed just barely, but enough. "Oh, of course. He loves it." James seized the excuse. "Actually, yeah. Mom want to see it." We rose together. As we walked down the hallway, I caught Cassie in my peripheral vision. She wasn't heading back to the kitchen. She was standing still, perfectly still, her eyes locked on us as we retreated. And for the first time, I saw the mask slip completely. Gone was the doting wife, the cheerful daughter-in-law. What remained was something colder, sharper, a woman calculating her next move. In James's office, the only room in the house that still looked like him, I shut the door behind us. My heart pounded, but my voice was steady. James, I need you to listen carefully, and I need you to answer honestly. How much do you really know about Cassie's past? He sank into his chair, exhaling like a man finally cornered. Not much, he admitted. She told me about Denver, the accident nursing school. But his voice broke. I've never seen proof. No photos, no diplomas, no old friends, nothing. I pulled out my phone again, showing him the messages from Robert. James, my lawyer's investigator checked everything. Cassandra Williams doesn't exist. At least not the way she told you. His face went white. That's impossible. She gets calls from the hospital all the time. She talks about her patients. I leaned closer. When have you ever heard those calls? Really heard them? He opened his mouth, then shut it. His eyes widened in dawning realization. She always takes them in the other room. She said it was patient confidentiality. And have you ever been to her job? Met her coworkers? No, he whispered. She said the hospital had strict rules. God, Mom. His voice cracked. What if you're right? I am right, I said softly. And we need to be careful. Before he could respond, the sound of footsteps moved down the hall. Cassie's voice called out, falsely cheerful. Is everything okay in there? James looked at me, panic in his eyes. I straightened, forcing calm into my tone. We're fine, sweetheart, I called back. Just talking about his presentation. Silence followed. Too long. Then, all right. Don't be long. Her footsteps retreated, but I knew she hadn't believed me. She knew something had shifted. James buried his face in his hands. What do we do? Mom? I rested a hand on his shoulder. We do what we always do. We face it. But not tonight, not yet. We let her think she's still in control. He lifted his head, eyes red, but burning now with something new resolve. And in that moment, I realized the confrontation wasn't coming. It had already begun. James sat slumped in his office chair, staring at the carpet as if the fibers might rearrange themselves into answers. His hands pressed against his temples the same way he used to when he was a boy, overwhelmed by math homework. Only this time, the problem was his marriage. Mom, he whispered, if you're right, if Cassie isn't who she says she is, then who is she? I took a deep breath, pulling the slim folder Robert had given me from my purse. I had debated all evening whether to show it to him, but the fear in his eyes told me he was ready. This, I said, placing the folder on the desk, is what Robert's investigator found. James hesitated before opening it, his fingers trembling. He pulled out the first page, a background check report. At the top, in bold black letters, was a name he'd never seen before, Catherine Blackwood. She's 34, not 38, I explained quietly. And those stories about her parents dying in a car crash, fabricated. Her parents are alive. They live in Phoenix. She hasn't spoken to them in over a decade. James blinked, his lips parting in disbelief. Phoenix. But she said. His voice trailed off, collapsing under the weight of the lie. He shuffled through the documents, marriage certificates, divorce decrees, bank records. Each piece a shard of glass cutting into the image of the woman he thought he knew. She's been married twice before I continued. Both husbands drained of their finances before the marriages ended abruptly. In one case, she emptied their joint savings account. In the other, she forged signatures to gain access to investments. When the truth surfaced, she vanished. James's eyes widened, scanning the photocopied bank statements. She cleaned them out. Both of them. Yes, I said softly. And now it's happening again. He shook his head violently, as if denial could undo the evidence in his hands. No, she loves me. I know she loves me. She calls me during the day, she makes dinner, His voice broke, collapsing into a whisper. She told me I saved her. I reached across the desk, placing my hand over his. Honey, she studied you. She knew what you needed to hear. She made herself into your perfect match. That's what con artists do. He pulled his hand away, burying his face in the crook of his arm. I could see his shoulders shaking. My heart clenched, but I didn't cry. I had to be the steady one now. From the hallway, I caught the faint creak of a floorboard. Cassie, listening. My pulse spiked, but I forced myself to stay calm. James, I whispered urgently, leaning closer. She's outside the door. He stiffened, lifting his head. His eyes darted to the door, then back to me. His face was pale, his voice barely audible. What do we do? I pressed a finger to my lips. Then more loudly I said, Well, that computer looks impressive. Show me how it works, James. Understanding flickered in his eyes. He turned to the monitor, clicking aimlessly through programs while I quietly slid the folder back into my purse. A moment later, Cassie's voice floated in from the hallway, syrupy sweet. Everything all right in there, fine, sweetheart? James called, his voice cracking. Just showing Mom some new software. Silence. Then the sound of retreating footsteps. James sagged in his chair. Mom, this is insane. What if she hears more? What if she finds out what you know? I looked him straight in the eye. She already suspects. That's why we have to be smart. We can't confront her without backup. That's why Robert told me not to call ahead. He knew we'd need proof before she could destroy it. James swallowed hard. So what now? I considered the question. The folder in my purse was enough to shake James's world, but it wasn't enough for the police, not yet. We needed more. We act normal, I said firmly. We give her no reason to run. Meanwhile, I'll work with Robert. He and his investigator can dig deeper. If she's been running this scheme for years, there are other victims. If we can connect the dots, we can bring her down. James rubbed his eyes, exhausted. And if she figures out we're on to her? I reached over and straightened the frame on his desk, the last photo of him with his father smiling in their old backyard. Then we make sure she can't take anything more from us. Not your money, not your future, not your life. A shadow passed across his face at my last word. He didn't ask what I meant. Maybe he already knew. We sat in silence, the hum of the computer filling the air. Finally, I placed a hand on his shoulder. We'll get through this, together. He nodded slowly, though his eyes were still clouded with disbelief. I don't know how to thank you. Don't thank me, I said softly. Just promise me you'll be careful, and promise me you'll trust me even when it hurts. A knock at the door startled us both. Cassie's voice again, bright and falsely casual. Dessert's ready. Should I bring it in here? James and I exchanged a glance. Neither of us wanted her anywhere near us right now. No, sweetheart, I called back. We'll come out. We rose together side by side like soldiers bracing for a battle neither of us had chosen. As I followed James out of the office, I clutched my purse tightly, feeling the weight of Robert's evidence pressing against my side. It wasn't just paper, it was the truth. And tonight, truth was the only weapon we had. We walked back into the dining room, trying to look calm, though the air around us felt sharp. The table was still set exactly as before, half-finished lasagna candles, flickering low glasses of wine catching the light. Cassie stood at the head of the table holding a pie server. Her smile stretched a little too wide. Peach cobbler, she announced brightly. James's favorite. My favorite, James echoed, his tone flat. She served generous slices, placing them neatly before us. Cinnamon and butter floated in the air, but neither of us picked up a fork. Cassie noticed instantly. Something wrong, she asked, her voice light. You've both been whispering all evening. Work presentation, James said quickly. Mom was giving me advice. She cut into her cobbler with surgical neatness. Funny you didn't seem stressed at lunch. He forced a smile. Things changed. Silence stretched. The only sound was the clock ticking on the wall, louder than it had any right to be. I glanced around beautiful decor, carefully chosen prints, polished surfaces. All Cassie's taste. None of James's life remained. I cleared my throat. Cassie, forgive my curiosity. I've been going over numbers in my head. The wedding, the move, the extras. I can't quite remember where it all landed. Her fork paused. Numbers. Yes. 47,000 for the wedding. 35 I gave from the house. Then another 15 later when the caterer adjusted the bill. Just wondering what the rest went toward. Her eyes flicked to James and back in less than a second. As I said, the honeymoon curtains, some student loans. James frowned. Cassie, the mortgage paperwork said you had no debt. Her smile faltered. I was embarrassed. You've always been successful, and I didn't want you to think less of me. James leaned back, his fork untouched. You should have told me. She reached for his hand, but he didn't take it. For a flicker of a second, I saw panic in her eyes. "I'll get dessert plates," she said abruptly, standing too fast. Her chair scraped the floor. She disappeared into the kitchen. The sound of running water started, then stopped. Cabinets opened and closed. James leaned toward me. "Mom, she's lying. I feel it." "She is," I said quietly. "But we need to be careful." We waited tense until she returned with forced cheer. "Everything okay in here, fine," I said, smiling thinly. "James was just showing me his new computer earlier." Her eyes narrowed slightly, but she said nothing. The meal ended without anyone touching the cobbler. James pushed his plate away, shoulders heavy. Cassie gathered dishes quickly, her movements sharp, almost mechanical. Then she vanished into the kitchen again. I stood uneasy. "I'll check the bathroom," I called. No answer. As I walked down the hall, I felt cool air slipping under the side door. I pushed it gently. The deadbolt was unturned. The door cracked open. My stomach dropped. "James," I called. He ran from the front window. "Her car's still here." "She has another ride," I said, scanning the empty counter. "Her purse is gone." Back in the dining room, something caught my eye. Cassie's phone lay next to her folded napkin. I picked it up. No lock screen, no passcode. Either arrogance or she'd meant to leave it. I tapped messages. The most recent thread was with someone named Marcus. Marcus Emergency. She hired a PI. Need extraction plan now. Cassie stall. Phoenix account needs 72 hours. Cassie old lady getting suspicious. My throat tightened. I opened photos, screenshots of James's bank accounts, insurance documents, even a half-filled beneficiary form. She'd been cataloging his life, preparing to drain it. James read over my shoulder, his face pale. She was planning to leave. "Yes," I said grimly, "and not until she finished." He staggered back, pressing a hand to his forehead. "Mom, what do we do?" "We stop her before she takes more." I slid the phone into a zip-top bag from the drawer, sealing it like evidence. "Call Robert, then call the police." He hesitated only a second before dialing, his voice shaking as he gave the address. Sirens were already faint in the distance. I locked the side door, securing the chain. Not to keep Cassie out, she was already gone, but to keep what remained of us safe inside. James set his phone down, trembling. "I loved her," he whispered, not defending, just mourning. "I know," I said softly. "That's what she counted on." The doorbell rang, 2 quick professional presses. Blue light flared across the curtains. I straightened, meeting James's terrified eyes. "Answer it," I told him, setting Cassie's phone squarely on the table like a final piece of truth. The dinner was over, so was the charade, and the night was about to shift from suspicion to survival. If you're still watching, comment 1, so I know you're still with me. 2 uniformed officers stepped into the house, their radios crackling softly. Blue and red lights flashed through the front windows, painting the walls in restless color. James stood stiff beside me, his face drained as if the sirens had sucked the blood from his body. "Mrs. Thompson," one officer asked, glancing at the bagged phone on the table. "You made the call." "Yes," I said firmly. My voice surprised me. It didn't shake. I gestured toward the phone. "That belongs to my daughter-in-law. She ran out the back door 15 minutes ago." The officer picked it up carefully. "Unlocked, yes. Take a look." The younger officer scrolled through the messages, whistling under his breath. "This isn't good. Whoever Marcus is, he's part of it. And the Phoenix account, that's interstate wire fraud." James pressed his palms against the counter. "She's been lying to me for months. About everything." The older officer, Detective Rodriguez, met his eyes with quiet sympathy. "You're not the first. These marriage fraud schemes, sadly, they're more common than you think. But you're lucky your mother caught it when she did. Otherwise, you might have lost far more than money." I folded my arms steady. She was trying to make him sign over his life insurance tonight. That was her end game. Rodriguez's expression darkened. "Then you probably saved his life." The words hit James harder than any punch. He sat heavily at the dining table, staring at the cobbler Cassie had abandoned. "She wanted me dead," he whispered. I placed a hand on his shoulder. "She wanted control, James. You were just in her way." The officers collected the phone, photographed the kitchen, and noted every detail. "We'll run this through financial crimes," Rodriguez said. "With evidence this strong, we can trace her accounts. But we'll need you both to come down to the station tomorrow for full statements." James nodded numbly. I signed the paperwork with a hand that barely trembled. As they left, the house fell silent again. The candles had burned low, dripping wax onto the polished table. Cassie's chair sat empty, angled slightly away from us, as if she'd planned her escape all along. James rubbed his eyes. What if they don't find her? I looked at the locked door at the chain pulled tight. Then we prepare, because if she's bold enough to come back, we'll be ready this time. The sirens faded into the distance, leaving only the tick of the clock. For the first time that night, I realized my hands were cold. The performance was over. Now it was a case. And cases don't close overnight. The house was quiet after the officers left, but it wasn't the kind of quiet that comforts. It was hollow sharp, like the silence in a church after the congregation has gone home. James and I sat across from each other at the dining table, the untouched cobbler between us, cooling into something heavy and uninviting. He ran both hands through his hair. "I can't believe this. I married a stranger." "You married an actress," I said gently. "A very convincing one." He let out a bitter laugh that broke into a groan. "I thought I was too smart to be fooled." "She knew exactly what to say, Mom. She made me feel like the luckiest man alive." "That was her skill," I reminded him. "Con artists study people. They look for loneliness, for trust. You were her mark. And she almost had me too." His eyes lifted to mine, searching. "What if she comes back?" "She won't," I said, though a chill worked its way up my spine. "Not tonight, but she'll try to contact you again. Or me. She won't walk away from money she thinks she can still take." James leaned back, exhausted. The man who usually handled corporate negotiations with confidence now looked like a boy who'd lost his compass. I stood and began clearing the plates needing to move to do something normal. That's when I saw it, Cassie's sweater draped casually over the back of the couch. Beige soft, with a faint lipstick stain near the collar. It looked ordinary, harmless, but in that moment, it felt like evidence, like she'd left a piece of herself behind to haunt us. I picked it up and folded it with steady hands. "She's not gone, James. People like her don't just disappear. They circle back." He dropped his face into his hands. "I don't know if I can take it." "You can," I said firmly. "And you will. Because this is not just about her lies. It's about taking back your life." The clock ticked toward midnight. I insisted James try to sleep, though I doubted either of us would. He went upstairs, shoulders slumped, while I made up the couch downstairs. Lying there in the dim light, I listened to every creak of the house, every rustle of wind against the siding. My mind replayed Robert's warning, the texts on her phone, the missing purse. Cassie hadn't fled blindly. She had a plan. Somewhere out there she was watching, calculating her next move. I pulled the blanket tighter around me and whispered into the dark, "You won't win." Sleep never came. Morning light slanted through the blinds of Robert Mitchell's office, but the air inside felt anything but calm. Papers were spread across the conference table. Photographs, copies of IDs, bank statements. James sat rigid beside me, his coffee untouched, his eyes dark from a sleepless night. Robert adjusted his glasses. "Margaret James, thank you for coming in. We've made progress overnight." "Progress?" The word sounded hopeful, but his tone was grave. The man sitting across from us stood extending his hand. "Detective Frank Morrison, Financial Crimes Task Force." He was younger than I expected, maybe mid-40s, with sharp eyes that missed nothing. He opened a folder and spread out a series of photographs. My breath caught. In each I saw Cassie, only she wasn't Cassie. Different hair, different names, different men standing proudly beside her in wedding photos. "Her real name is Catherine Blackwood," Morrison said. "She's been operating under multiple aliases for nearly a decade. We have at least 17 confirmed victims across 4 states. Most were professional men, recently widowed or divorced." James's jaw clenched. He stared at one photo of her in a white dress beside a man I didn't recognize. His hand trembled as he shoved it away. "She targeted me," he said flatly, "because I was lonely." Morrison nodded. "Because you were ideal. And because she knew your mother had assets. That's what made this case different. Usually she drains the husband within months and disappears. With you, she stayed longer. She saw the bigger prize. I felt a chill despite the sunlit office. You're saying I was the real target. Robert's expression softened. Margaret, she researched your finances, your life insurance, even your retirement accounts. The Phoenix transfer we found, it links directly to her sister, who, by the way, is very much alive. James leaned forward, his voice raw. So she was planning to rob my mother blind, not just me, both of you, Morrison said. But we have a chance here. With the phone you recovered plus the paper trail, we can build a strong case. It may be the largest marriage fraud operation we've uncovered in years. I exhaled slowly, steadying myself. Last night I had felt like prey. This morning I began to feel something different, like a witness who might finally see justice. James looked at me, eyes filled with pain, but also a flicker of resolve. Mom, we fight this. We fight her. I reached for his hand. We already are. Detective Morrison leaned forward, his hands clasped. We believe Catherine will try to reestablish contact. She won't walk away from over $300,000 still in play. That's where you come in, Mrs. Thompson. James stiffened. No, absolutely not. She's already taken enough from my mother. I won't let her be bait. I laid a hand on his arm. It's not your choice, James. It's mine. My voice was calm, steady. If playing along brings her out of hiding, I'll do it. Morrison nodded. Exactly. We'll control the environment. You'll reach out through one of her known contacts, express confusion, even hurt. Not anger. She needs to believe she still has a chance to repair the relationship. James shook his head in disbelief. You're asking my mother to walk into the lion's den. No, Morrison corrected. We're asking her to lure the lion into a cage. Robert slid a document across the table. Her phone records show she has a small network of people who provide false employment verification. If you message through one of them, she'll know you're reaching out. I studied the names, the fabricated hospital contacts. My stomach churned, but beneath the fear was clarity. Cassie Catherine had stolen months of my life. She had nearly stolen my son's future. If this was the way to stop her, then I wouldn't hesitate. What do you want me to say? I asked. Morrison's lips thinned. Something simple. That you're worried James misunderstood that you want to help fix the marriage. She'll likely claim he was controlling, maybe even abusive. That's her pattern. But she'll also try to convince you that she still loves him, and that's when she'll circle back to the money. James's hands clenched into fists. I don't want to hear her twist this around. I don't want to hear her make me the villain. You don't have to, I said quietly. I'll handle her. For a moment, the room fell silent. Then James met my eyes. There was fear there, yes, but also something else, respect. Mom, he whispered, promise me you'll be careful. I squeezed his hand. I've been careful my whole life. Now I'm going to be smart. Morrison closed the folder. Good. Then it's settled. We'll stage the first contact tomorrow. As James and I walked out of the office into the bright New Mexico sun, I felt a strange calm wash over me. For months, Cassie had been writing the story of our lives, but now at last, the pen was back in my hand. The next afternoon, I sat in a corner booth of a coffee shop in downtown Santa Fe, my hands wrapped around a cup of tea that had long since gone cold. Outside, the desert sun blazed against the glass, but inside, I felt chilled to the bone. Detective Morrison had been precise with the plan. His team was scattered discreetly throughout the cafe, one at the counter pretending to study a laptop, another near the door, and a third outside in an unmarked car. My role was simple: act like a concerned mother-in-law who just wanted to mend fences. I had sent the message that morning, carefully worded under Morrison's guidance. Cassie, I don't know what happened last night. James seemed upset, but I want to help. Please let me understand. Her reply came quickly, dripping with regret and manipulation. He's been so controlling. I was scared, but I still love him. Could we talk? Maybe you can help us fix this. And so here I was, waiting for the woman who had stolen nearly everything from us. At exactly 2:00, she walked in. My breath caught, even though I had prepared myself. Her hair was darker now, dyed a chestnut brown. She wore no makeup, her clothes plainer than I'd ever seen. To a stranger, she might have looked like any tired young woman, but I knew better. Behind the subdued appearance was the predator I had come to know as Catherine Blackwood. "Mom Thompson," she said, her voice trembling with practiced emotion. She stepped toward me, eyes shining with tears that appeared on cue. "Thank you for meeting me." I stood and hugged her the way any loving mother-in-law might. To the world we looked like two women patching up family drama. But inside I marveled at her audacity to cling to her act even after the walls were closing in. We sat. She dabbed her eyes with a tissue, lowering her gaze, as if weighed down by sorrow. I don't even know where to start. James changed so suddenly. He accused me of lying, of stealing. He frightened me. I tilted my head, forcing sympathy into my tone. "What kind of things did he accuse you of?" She sighed, shaking her head. "That I never worked at the hospital, that I'd been married before. Ridiculous things. He even said I was hiding money." Her lies slid across the table like poison, each one carefully designed to flip the narrative. If I hadn't seen the evidence, I might have believed her. That was her gift. I leaned closer, lowering my voice. "Cassie, I just need the truth. James showed me some bank statements. He thinks you sent money to Phoenix." For the first time, her mask wavered. The tears stopped. Her eyes sharpened. She studied me, calculating. "How much do you really know?" she asked, her voice stripped of sweetness. I met her gaze steadily. "Enough." The transformation was instant. In the space of seconds, the trembling wife vanished. In her place was the woman who had orchestrated years of fraud. Cold, confident, dangerous. "You think you can stop me?" She hissed, her tone low enough that only I could hear. "That money is gone, and you can't prove half of what you think you know." I smiled, my heart steady for the first time in months. "We don't need to prove half, just enough." At my subtle gesture, Detective Morrison appeared beside the booth as if he had materialized from the air. Two more officers closed in from the entrance. Catherine Blackwood, Morrison said firmly, flashing his badge. "You're under arrest for fraud, identity theft, and financial elder abuse." For a split second, her face went blank. Then fury flared. She didn't struggle as they cuffed her, but the look she gave me could have set fire to the room. "This isn't over," she spat. "You think you've beaten me? You have no idea what I've built." "Maybe," I said, softly. "But I do know one thing. You're finished with us." The officers led her out, her dark hair catching the sunlight, as the cafe door swung shut behind them. The room buzzed with curious whispers, patrons staring after the woman who only minutes before had played the role of a grieving wife. I sat back, exhaling slowly. For the first time in months, my body felt lighter. James appeared a moment later. He had been waiting in a car around the corner. When he saw the officers escorting her away, his shoulders sagged, relief and heartbreak colliding in his eyes. "Is it really over?" he asked, sliding into the booth across from me. I reached across the table, taking his hand. "The worst is over. Now comes the rebuilding." He squeezed my hand, his grip trembling. "I don't know how to thank you." "Don't thank me," I said, my voice steady. "Thank yourself. You saw the truth even when it hurt. That's what saved you." Outside, the police car pulled away, carrying Catherine Blackwood, the woman who had nearly destroyed us, into custody. I watched it go, a strange mix of satisfaction and sadness in my chest. Because as much as I hated her, a part of me still grieved the daughter-in-law I thought I had. The woman who never existed. But as I looked at James, alive and free beside me, I knew I had gained something far more valuable, the certainty that no matter how deep the deception, truth always finds its way to the surface. 6 months had passed since the day Catherine Blackwood, once Cassie Thompson, my daughter-in-law, was led out of that coffee shop in handcuffs. Time has a strange way of stretching and folding after a storm. Some days it felt like only yesterday she was standing in my kitchen, calling me Mom Thompson with a smile that made me believe. Other days, the memories felt like they belonged to someone else's life entirely. James and I had rebuilt slowly, brick by brick, moment by moment. He moved into a smaller home, one that reflected his own personality for the first time in years. His father's antique clock sat proudly on the mantel again, ticking out the rhythm of honest time. My new house was modest, but it was mine, chosen not out of manipulation, but because I liked the sunlit porch and the quiet street. The legal process was long and exhausting. Detectives uncovered victim after victim. Catherine's web of lies spanned nearly a decade and stretched across 4 states. Some men lost their savings. others their homes, and one even his health from the stress she caused. I attended hearings, gave statements, handed over every scrap of evidence I had. Each time I walked into that courthouse, I remembered the verse from John 8:32. You will know the truth, and the truth will set you free. It struck me how true those words were, even in the messiness of modern life. Truth didn't erase the loss of my money. It didn't undo James's heartbreak. But it freed us from the prison of deception. It pulled us out of the shadows where lies thrive and brought us back into the light where healing could finally begin. I thought often of the Western proverb, "What is done in the dark will come to light." Catherine had believed she could bury her past under new names, new hair colors, new identities. But no matter how carefully she covered her tracks, the truth found her. It always does. There were nights when James sat across from me, his face still heavy with shame. "I should have seen it," he'd whisper. "I should have known." And each time I reminded him love is not foolish. Trust is not weakness. Wanting to believe in another person is not a crime. The crime belongs to the one who weaponizes trust for greed. I told him another verse I held close. Do not be deceived. God is not mocked. For whatever one sows, that will he also reap. Galatians 6:7. Catherine sowed greed, lies, and betrayal, and though she ran for years, she could not outrun the harvest of her actions. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the mountains, James asked me, "Mom, do you ever regret selling the old house?" Giving her so much, I thought about it. I thought about the garden where I had buried my husband, the rooms where laughter once echoed the years of sacrifice. And then I shook my head. No. Because even though she took advantage, I gave with a pure heart. She may have stolen the money, but she can't touch the love behind it. That belongs to me. His eyes filled, and for the first time I saw him truly forgive himself. When the final restitution hearing came, the court announced that a portion of the stolen funds had been traced. Not all, never all, but enough to help victims start over. James and I received some back, but strangely, it didn't matter as much anymore. What mattered was knowing the cycle of lies had been broken. That night I sat on my porch, a cup of tea in hand, and thought about the strange gift hidden inside this tragedy. I had learned that resilience doesn't come from avoiding storms. It comes from surviving them with your integrity intact. I had learned that family is not defined by the titles of wife or daughter-in-law, but by honesty, loyalty, and presence. And I had learned that betrayal, while devastating, is not the end. It can be a beginning, too. To anyone watching, I want you to hear me clearly. Don't ignore your instincts. Don't let loneliness blind you to red flags. And when betrayal strikes, remember you are stronger than you think. This is not just my story. It's one of countless family betrayal stories. Families across the world have faced lies, manipulation, and heartbreak. But every story carries the same lesson. The truth may take time, but it will come. And when it does, it brings freedom. So I leave you with this call. If you've ever lived through betrayal, if you've been tricked, abandoned, or underestimated, share your story. Speak it out loud, because silence only protects the liar, never the truth. Like, share, and subscribe. If this story touched you, and tell me in the comments, what moment in your life taught you that the truth will always win? The Bible promises you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free. Tonight, as I sit in a home built on honesty with a son who trusts again, I can say those words are not just scripture. They are lived reality. And maybe, just maybe, they can be yours too.